Welcome to this video, great to have you on board. In the last video of this series, I explained what Firebase Cloud Functions are about. In this video, I want to get started with writing a Firebase Cloud Function, and we will write a function that takes an image we put into the cloud storage, that automatically runs whenever we put an image there, I should say, and that then simply resizes the image into a different format. Let's have a look at how this works in this video. So here I am in the Firebase console. I'm creating a new project here. So let me quickly do that. And in that project, I want to add this Firebase Cloud function that will run whenever a file is uploaded. So with that, let's wait for this to finish. Once it did finish, you can go to functions, but here, at least at the point of time I'm recording this, you can't write your function. We have to do that locally with the help of Firebase Cli. It's super simple to do though, so let's quickly install that. Here I am in the terminal of the Mac, or open the command prompt on Windows, and then we need to install a global package through npm. For that, you need to have npm, Node's package manager, installed, which you do install by going to nodejs.org and simply installing the latest version of Node.js. With that installed, you can run npm install -g firebase-tools. This is the toolset the CLI Firebase offers. Now on Mac and Linux, you might need to add a sudo in front of this to get the right permissions. Thereafter, you might also be prompted to enter your password. And once you did that, it will install this Firebase toolset, which you can use to, well, run your Firebase projects or actually create a Firebase project, create an environment where you can write Firebase Cloud Functions. So I'll be back once this installation finished. Once it's finished, you first of all have to sign into your Firebase account. For that, you can simply type Firebase. This command should now be available since you installed the Firebase tools globally. Log in. Once you type this, you are asked whether you want to allow the collection of data, and thereafter a new tab should open where you have to authenticate. Now you have to copy that URL it shows you there and simply log into your Firebase account in that new tab that opened. Once you did all of that, it should successfully complete here in the terminal, and thereafter you can create a new Firebase project with the CLI. For that, I'll first of all create a new folder. I navigated into that new folder, and in there, the folder which you want to turn into your Firebase project, and as a side note, this could be your Angular, Vue, or React project where you want to add some Firebase functionality. So this can also be a folder where you have another project already. But in this folder, which is an empty folder, I'll run Firebase init. And this will now initialize this as a Firebase project. Now, you're then asked which features you want to use in this project, and I want to use functions, so I'll navigate there in the command line and hit space to enable this. You could also turn on hosting if you want to use Firebase hosting for your single page application, let's say, but I won't do that here. So I want to just have my functions here. With that, I'll hit enter. And then you have to choose one of your projects. So I'll choose the project I just created in the Firebase console. You can then choose the language you want to use in your cloud functions. You could use TypeScript, but I'll stick to JavaScript. And with that, you're almost done. You can then opt to automatically install all required dependencies. And I want to do that here. So let's wait for this to finish. And thereafter, we can write our function code. The setup of the project finished, and I opened it in Visual Studio Code, so your normal web project editor, whichever editor you use. There you'll find a configuration file which holds the ID of your project. This of course should be, well, your project ID. Firebase JSON doesn't hold any configuration, and then we got this functions folder. There we also get a node modules and a package.json file. These are now the dependencies of the function we're writing, and in the index.js file here, we can write our function, our Firebase function. Here, this commented out part, if we comment it in, actually already is a Firebase Cloud function. This would be one that listens to incoming HTTP requests. You remember that slide I showed you in the last video? That would be the case, or this would be an example for how you can create your own HTTP endpoint. Now, I'm not interested in creating my own HTTP endpoint here. I want to create a function that reacts to files being uploaded or file events in general in my cloud storage. So let's see how we can write such a function. To react to storage events, I actually won't use the HTTPS area on my functions package here, which is coming from Firebase Functions, which is made available by default. But instead here, I want to use the storage area. Now on storage, we got the object or bucket property, or method to be precise. This simply means, do you want to specify a specific bucket for which you want to listen to events? Or if you directly specify object and execute this as a method without passing any arguments, then you will say, I want to use the default bucket your Firebase project ships with. I will use that bucket. There you then have one method on change, and this now is exactly doing what it sounds like. It will give you the information, or it will trigger whenever something changes. On change, therefore, requires a function you pass as an argument, and in this function you'll get some event data. So this argument will be passed into the function automatically by Firebase. And then in there, we don't send a response because we're not creating a HTTP endpoint. In there, instead, in the end, we will return to tell Firebase that we're done. If you're writing some async code in there, which we eventually will, you should return a promise, by the way. But we'll see all of that. For now, let's simply return here. And besides returning, or before returning, I want to simply console log my event object to see what's inside of it. With that, we got our first basic function created. As a side note, if you want to have multiple functions, you would simply export another function here, which you also set up in the same way, and that would then be treated separately. And I will also rename this to on file change, whatever you want to use. With that, we got our cloud function set up. Now let's simply test it. And for that, I'll open up the terminal. It's the normal terminal, just integrated into this IDE. And to push this function into the cloud so that we can test it, I'll run Firebase deploy. And this will now take my function code, bundle it up, upload it to Firebase, and set it up there so that we can then, well, basically use that function on Firebase. So let's wait for this to finish and let's then try it out. The deployment process can take a while. It finished for me. Let's now have a look at it. In our Firebase project console, you can click on functions or refresh that page if you already are on it. And there, you should now see your newly deployed function, onFileChange, the function we just created. You also see the attached event that it's on object change events. You can also see the amount of executions, and you can access the logs here. That will become important to see what console log actually wrote. Now let's try it out, and let's go to storage. And there we got our default bucket. If we click on get started, yeah, we want to take these default settings. This is our default bucket, which will be used. And let's now simply upload a file to it. Here I got a demo image, which I will simply upload. Pick any image you want, or can be any file, doesn't have to be an image. I'll use that image. And it's now uploading. And now this should have actually triggered our function. So let's click on functions here. And the executions amount might still show 0 because it takes a little while to update this. But if we view the logs here, we should see the logs showing this execution of the function we just encountered. And this might also take a second and simply reload if it takes a bit longer. Now, here you see we got an error that the function returned undefined, or a warning. But we also see the console log statement with the function, or with this event object we output. Now, there you see this event object actually had a data property which holds information about the bucket that issued this, the content type of the file that changed. And if we have a look through all of that, we also see some additional information like the link to the file if we wanted to view it, some metadata attached to the file, and also the event type, that it was a change event. Now, let's see if this also triggers for deleting. So if we go back to storage, let's now select this file and simply delete it. And let's then again have a look at functions and view the logs. And let's see if this also triggered a function execution. Now, thus far it doesn't look like it, but here we go. So as I said, it might take a little while. So this is the function that just executed here. If we expand this here, you see it's almost the same data, but there's one important difference. For the data here, we get this resource state property, which in this case is not exists. If we have a look at the last function execution where we added this file, there you see that the resource state was exists. So this gives us an idea about which specific type of event we had here. That in this case, the file was deleted, for example. We could determine this by checking for the resource state. Here it doesn't exist anymore, so if we want to run some function only upon the deletion of files, this would be how we could, well, check for that. So with that, we can see how that function runs. Now let's do something more useful. Let's maybe start with renaming the file. So we got this event object and we can see what's inside of it here. It has a data property with some useful information. And why don't we now take that file, rename it, and then put it back into the storage? Wouldn't that be an idea? Let's first of all retrieve the object by accessing event data, because that essentially is our object data we got. Now here we can find out the bucket by accessing object bucket. So I'm accessing this first property here. We can also get the content type by accessing object content type. And let's also get the file path here by accessing object name. So file path essentially is just the name here, which will be not just the file name, but also the path in this bucket. Now I'll add a console log statement here and simply output file change detected, function execution started, just to have some log statement in between so that we can see where we are at. And now I want to take that file and basically put it back into the bucket with a changed name. For that, I need to install an additional package. So navigate into the functions folder in your project folder. And there I'll run npm install -- save. And now it's at google-cloud/storage, which is a collection of Google Cloud Storage on which Firebase Storage is built on, functions and methods we can use. And one of them is basically putting data into a bucket. And we need that functionality here. So with that installed, I'll import it as a dependency at the top. GCS is require at Google Cloud/storage, and you execute this as a function. And the cool thing is, if you're in a cloud function, a Firebase cloud function that happens or is triggered upon a file change event, you can use the Google Cloud Storage package here without having to initialize it with any credentials. You can just start putting data into that bucket without any special setup required. So what I'll now do is I will first of all create a new bucket I want to put it to. So dist bucket maybe, or destination bucket or something like that. And I will use GCS, and there we have a bucket method to set up a reference to a bucket. And I will pass the bucket this file was in because I want to keep it in the same bucket. I just want to rename it. As a next step, I want to download that file which we uploaded, which triggered this event, so that I can then manipulate it and put it back into the bucket. So I'll create a temp file path. So this is just where I want to temporarily download it because, and that's important to know, in Firebase Cloud Functions, you got a small temporary storage, which will be cleaned up whenever the function execution is done essentially, but which you can use during the function execution. Now to find out the path for this, we can use a Node.js package, which is called OS, giving us access to some operating system specific functions. And I also want to construct the path, so I'll use the path package Node.js provides. And with these two packages, we can construct our temporary path by calling path join here. And I want to join the temporary path of the operating system the function runs on, which I can get with the tempdir function, with the file name we got. So the file name of our uploaded file, file path is what I named it here. Now this path, however, is the full path. I just want to get the name. I can do this with the path package and there with the base name method, which I pass the file path to. This will then just give me the file name part of the path. So with that, we constructed this temporary file path. I want to store my file whilst the function here executes. I'll then also create a metadata constant where I will essentially set up a JavaScript object where I set the content type to content type. So the content type I got from the file so that we keep that. And then I will no longer return nothing, but I will return dest bucket using that cloud storage package file, which allows me to execute the operation on a file. The file here is my file path, so the path we got from the event that triggered here. And then I can call download. Now, to download, I need to pass some configuration here. And the configuration is to where I want to download it. You do this by adding the destination key. And here I want to set it to my temp file path, of course, to make sure that I download the file from my bucket into the temporary folder. Now this will return as a promise. And of course I want to do something when this finishes. So here in the then block, I will know that the file has been downloaded. Now I can rename it and re-upload it, or do whatever I want to it, of course, not just rename it. We will do more to it later. Here, however, I will just rename it. Now, renaming is simple. I can just return dest bucket and call upload and put the file from the temp file path back onto the server. And if this doesn't make too much sense here, well, it's a trivial operation. We will soon add more logic than just downloading and uploading, but these are the core building blocks you have to know. So I will upload that file again. It hasn't been renamed, but I can rename it now. I pass a configuration to the upload method where I also set up a destination. And here I can just change the file name. So here what I could do is I could add a renamed prefix plus my old file name maybe. So I could use path base name of file path to get this original file name. And now it would be the same file name with renamed. Side note, if it was in a different path before, it now isn't anymore because I dropped the path. I could re-add it in front of it, but I don't want to do that here. And that is my destination. Now I'll also set up the metadata key here to pass my metadata, which essentially sets up the content type of the new file, which should be the same content type as before. And now with that, I got my upload functionality here, which eventually will finish and should put the renamed file back onto the storage. Now before we try that out, let me add more code. I want to add an if check here to make sure we don't enter an infinite loop. I want to check if the uploaded file path, the file name, starts with renamed already, so that I don't re-trigger the function for that renamed file. So I will check if path base name for the file path, so for the path of the file that triggered this cloud function, if that starts with renamed. So what we put to the file here, so that I don't re-trigger this. If that's the case, I simply want to return here. I don't want to continue execution because now I know the file that changed is the file we just renamed. I don't want to trigger a function again, or otherwise we would enter an infinite loop, which we certainly don't want to. I will also log something here. We already renamed that file. Now, with all of that in place, let's save this and let's see if that works by going out of the functions folder in the terminal and rerunning Firebase deploy to again push this updated version of the function back onto Firebase Cloud Functions. And this will simply replace the old version of that function. Will not be created as a new one, will replace the old one instead. Now let's wait for this to finish and let's then try it again. The deployment finished. Let's go back to our functions console here on Firebase and we will still see the same function as before. Now we see the execution also updated. And now I'll go to storage, and I again will upload a file to it. So let's click upload file and pick that same file as before, put it there. It's uploading here. And here it is. And now let's have a look at our functions log here. So for the function, let's view the logs. And as always, this can take a second before the logs show up here for the current function execution. Here it is, however. And you see we got two executions here. One at 9:27:15 and a couple of milliseconds, and then a couple of milliseconds later. Now we also see we already renamed the file here, so good thing we implemented this if check, because this was the function running the second time for the updated file. This is the function running the first time. Now let's have a look at storage, and we should see two files in there now. And we do. That's the renamed winter. And as you can see, it has the same file size. If we do it, it's also the same image as you can see here on the right. That's the original one. And with that, you learned how you can use that to do something with the incoming files. You also learned that it's quite important to make sure you don't enter an infinite loop. Now let's do more useful stuff to the image though than just renaming it in this way. I want to also resize it. For this, I'll use a library named image-resizing, which contains a lot of functionalities we can use to change images in all different kinds of ways. You'll find a link in the video description with more detail. I'll just use it to resize that. The cool thing is, image-resizing already is pre-installed in the environment the Cloud function runs in. All we have to do is use a package that allows us to run basically tools, binaries that are installed on the server the Cloud function runs in the end. It's a package called spawn, which I require from a package I have to install. And this will be called child process promise. There we can then access the spawn property. Now let's install that in the functions folder. So navigate in there and run npm install --save child process promise. It's essentially a package that allows us to run any processes on the operating system of this function and get back a promise. We'll navigate out of the folder thereafter. And with that, we can use that spawn here as a function to run, well, native programs installed on that server, so to say. I want to run such a program here when we downloaded the file. There I want to return spawn, and due to it coming from that child process promise package, this will give us back a promise. I want to return spawn here and now pass convert. That is a command we can execute on this system the Firebase function runs on, and it's coming from image-resizing. So I want to run convert, and then I pass an array of arguments here to that convert command, and that are simply commands the convert command, or these are arguments the convert command understands, like the input, the file name basically, so temp file path, so the file we stored on the Cloud function storage. Then the second argument is that I want to resize it. We do this by -resize. And third argument are the dimensions. And the dimensions will keep the aspect ratio, and we'll use the smaller of the two relevant sizes. So let's say I want to resize this to 500 by 500. And again, this will not necessarily spit out an image of size 500 by 500. It will simply try to fit the existing image into this format by keeping the aspect ratio. And then I will specify where to store it. Well, this will simply be the same file name. So I will overwrite that local file. I still want to upload that, but this has to happen in a new then call because, again, spawn returns a promise. So I chain another then call. And in this then call, I know that the file will have been resized. So I'll also name this resized and then simply upload it again, just as before. Now, since I named this to resized here, I also have to update my check here, resized. And I will add a second check. What if we actually deleted a file? Then we would fail here because we tried to download a file we don't have. So what I'll actually do first is I'll add another check here and simply check if object resource state equals not exists. Remember, this was one value we could see here in the Cloud function log for one of our first executions, where we could see that if we triggered a delete event, that resource state would it be not exists. So this is what I'm checking for here. If that's the case, we deleted a file. So I'll log we deleted a file, comma exit, and thereafter I'll also just return, because upon file deletion I don't want to do anything. So these are two useful checks. And with that we should now resize the file and then upload it again. So let's save everything here and let's again run Firebase deploy to see this changed function in action. Deployment finished. Now let's try it out. Let's go to storage again. Let me first of all delete both files here. Both commands will now trigger our cloud function, so it should execute here, but it also should simply quit because we specified that we don't want to do anything if we have a delete event. So let's simply wait for this. And actually this didn't work as expected, so let's have a look at the code here. Object resource state. And actually that should be all right. Let's try this again later. Maybe the function just wasn't updated yet when I deleted this. So let's try uploading a file now. Let's take the same file as before. And actually we don't even have to go to the functions log here. We could simply reload this page and we should see the resized file sit next to our original file now. And there we have it, resized winter. You see the file size is much smaller. And if you access it, there you see the file again. Now, if we quickly download that file to inspect it locally, you will see that the dimensions are 500 by 281, which simply means it took the 500 and adjusted the other one to keep the aspect ratio. Now let's simply see if that check here with not exists does really not work. So back in our storage console here, let's delete both files again and let's see if again it just fails. Because it should now really not fail, but simply exit because we, well, already deleted the files. We deleted a file exit, so this works fine. So it wasn't updated the time before. This actually is it for this video. You learned how to react to file changes, how to make sure you react to the right changes, and how you can then download that file, manipulate it in whichever way you want it, and put it back onto the bucket. Or not put it back, just download it and do something here, which doesn't make too much sense though, because this local storage in the cloud function gets cleaned up once the function execution is done. Anyways, you learned a lot you can do with this file change event here. Now in the next video, I want to have a look at creating a RESTful endpoint with the HTTP event.